They called the cops on a gardener, said he looked suspicious. What they didn't know, he once helped stop a war with nothing but language. This is the story of how silence became a revolution. If that moved you, subscribe. We tell the stories others bury. There's a place where the grass is always green. Not because it rains more, but because someone is paid to water it every morning, before the first Range Rover rolls out the driveway. That place is called Summerhill. Summerhill doesn't smell like sweat. It smells like imported lavender and freshly waxed floors. Behind each white-columned mansion stands a story of money inherited, deals struck over golf, and children who don't worry about lunch debt. Summerhill sparkles, but just past the wrought iron gates and the smile-too-wide security guard, across the cracked asphalt that no one's voted to fix in 3 election cycles, there's another world. On the other side, they call it District 9, not because it's official, just because it sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, like a place no one wants to go. The sidewalks here are cracked like old knuckles. The air smells like fried food and diesel. The homes sag, the mailboxes lean. But if you look closely, you'll find life raw, stubborn, and unfiltered. And every morning, a man named Mateo Alvarez crosses that invisible line. Not many notice him. They see the khaki overalls, the gardening gloves. To Summerhill, Mateo is part of the landscaping. Like a bush that moves. A brown shadow with a leaf blower. They don't see the man. Only the roll. The Alvarez truck, a beaten-up Chevy with peeling paint, pulls into the mayor's circular driveway. Mateo steps out. Mid-50s, slight limp, hands like old rope. His face carries the kind of silence that takes years to master. No one greets him. That's fine. No one ever does. He unloads his tools, rake, pruner, spray bottle labeled EcoSafe, and begins trimming the rosebush beneath the mayor's pristine patio, just like every Monday. Meanwhile, from the second-story window, a little girl watches. Ava, 7 years old, barefoot, curious, untouched by the codes her parents follow. Is that the garden man? She whispers, nose pressed to the glass. Why does he talk to the flowers? Down below, Mateo hums a melody in Spanish, quietly, as if each petal deserves a lullaby. A German shepherd explodes onto the lawn. Fur graying, eyes alert, collar. Tag reads, K9 unit, retired. It stops inches from Mateo. Mateo freezes. The dog growls. Then tilts its head. Then unexpectedly wags its tail. From the back porch, the mayor's wife appears, clutching a phone. Hey! She yells. What do you think you're doing here? Mateo, still crouched by the flowers, looks up, confused. I'm working, ma'am. Don't lie to me. I saw you talking to my daughter last week. Did you touch her? You need to leave. Now he stands slowly. Hurt flickers across his face, gone in a second. I have permission. Weekly maintenance, from your husband. But she's already dialing. I'm calling the police. Mateo lowers his tools. He doesn't argue, doesn't raise his voice, just gathers his rake. And as he walks away, the camera lingers on the retired Kenan sitting calmly in the flower bed, watching its former partner scream false alarms. Back near the fence line, Jamal waits for the school bus. 10 years old. Hoodie zipped up even though it's 80 degrees. He watches Mateo walk past. Did they call the cops on you again? Jamal asks. Mateo nods slightly. Guess they forgot I'm the gardener again. He murmurs. They forget a lot, Jamal says. Sometimes they forget I live here too. Mateo almost smiles. Jamal looks down, nudges his backpack. Hey, I saw the dog. He liked you. Mateo pauses. Not many do. Yeah, me neither. Their shared silence says more than any conversation. Roy, early 70s, sits in a rocking chair outside a crumbling duplex. Dark skin, deep lines. A Vietnam War cap tilted low. He watches the news on a portable radio, volume low. Like the truth's easier to bear when it's whispered. Mateo walks by. They called the cops on you? Roy asks without looking up. Mateo doesn't answer. You know, back in '72, I got cuffed for asking for mustard at a diner in Jackson, Mississippi, Roy says. They said I was being threatening, Mateo exhales. Not a laugh, just shared exhaustion. Roy turns down the radio. They don't see men, hermano, just uniforms or no uniforms. Scene shift. Police SUV pulls up to Mateo's house. That night, 2 white officers step out. Knock. Mateo opens the door. Calm. Hands visible. Sir, we received a report of trespassing at 843 Summerhill Avenue. I work there. Do you have proof? He hands over a crumpled invoice. The officer glances at it, unimpressed. Still need you to come with us. We'll figure it out down at the station. No warrant? Just asking questions, sir. Voluntary. Roy walks up from next door. He's not going anywhere. Sir, step back. Roy raises both hands. I'm a vet. I know the law. Unless he's under arrest, you got no right. Tension crackles. A beat too long. Then, the radio on. The officer's belt buzzes. Dispatch. Code 4. Let him go. The cops back off. Roy doesn't move. Next time, come with a warrant. Or a conscience. Mateo closes the door. Sits in the dark. In his hands, a worn photo. A classroom. Dozens of children. A blackboard filled with 6 languages. On the back, faded ink. Professor Mateo Alvarez, Linguistics, United Nations Exchange Program. 1998. He puts the photo back in the drawer, locks it, and says nothing. But the dog? The old canine? Somehow, it's waiting outside the door. Tail wagging. As if it remembers the scent of something deeper than grass. Something dignified. Mateo wakes before sunrise. Like always, the neighborhood outside his window doesn't hum, it groans. Pipes clank, sirens in the far-off distance. Somewhere, someone's arguing already, but inside his small 1-bedroom unit, it's quiet. He folds his blanket with military precision, not because he has to, just because some habits remain. On the counter, there's 1 banana. He splits it in half, wraps the smaller end in foil, places it in a worn lunch sack beside 2 hard-boiled eggs and a bottle of water. Not much, but enough. He grabs his bag and quietly steps outside. The dog is there again. Same spot. Tail thumping. Mateo squints at it. Go home. The dog doesn't move. He exhales, then mutters in German. Du solltest gehen. The dog tilts its head, then lets out a small, pleased whine, as if it recognizes the language. Mateo stares. A flicker of curiosity in his eyes, then quickly buried. He walks. The dog follows. Summerhill Security Gate. Mateo approaches the gated community. A young security officer in reflective glasses stands inside a booth, scrolling TikTok. He doesn't look up until the dog barks. You can't come in here, the guard says, already annoyed. Mateo holds up a laminated ID card. Weekly maintenance. For Mayor Thompson. The guard barely glances. Don't see you on the list. I'm on every Monday. Been for years. List is digital now. Gotta have a QR code. Mateo doesn't react. Can I call the mayor's office? The guard shrugs. They ain't in yet. Behind them, a luxury SUV honks. A woman in pearls and oversized sunglasses waves impatiently. The guard flicks a switch, opening the gate for her. Then turns back. You wait outside. No QR, no entry. She drives through. Doesn't glance at Mateo. But the moment she sees the dog, she scowls. Is that thing still alive? She scoffs. Should have put it down when my husband retired. Mateo's face doesn't move. The gate slams shut. He backs away. The dog growls low. Protective. He mutters again in German. The dog settles. The guard watches, suddenly unsure. A sunlit classroom. Children of every shade laugh. A chalkboard filled with conjugations. Mateo stands at the front, holding up a globe. Communication, he says, is how we stop wars before they start. Laughter. Someone claps. Then dash. Cut. Back to reality. Mateo stands outside the gate. Alone. Again. Roy sits with a group of older men. One has a cane. Another's in a wheelchair. All wear faded caps with pins. Korea, Vietnam, Gulf. They're playing dominoes. But no one's really watching the game. Did you hear about Alvarez? One asks. Again? Another grunts. Yep, security turned him away. Called the cops yesterday. Roy leans back, sighs. What's it gonna take for this damn town to see? Another vet speaks, voice soft. Truth don't matter here, Roy. Presentation does. They nod. The man with the cane adds. To them, he's just a gardener. To us, he's the man who translated letters for widows who couldn't read their son's final words. Silence. Roy pushes back his chair. I'm going to City Hall. Gonna file a complaint? No. He picks up a folder thick with yellowed papers. I'm gonna remind them what a soldier looks like when he's not in uniform. Inside a lavish dining room, the mayor and his wife entertain two businessmen from out of town. Investing in land abroad is all about language. One says, "You gotta know how to talk to these people." The mayor chuckles. Well, funny you say that. We had a gardener who spoke more tongues than my entire cabinet. His wife stiffens. You mean that guy? The one from yesterday? Yes, the mayor shrugs. He's harmless. Didn't seem harmless when you told me to call the cops. She snaps. The businessmen glance at each other. The mayor clears his throat. You know how things are these days. Better safe than sorry. Then, a knock at the door. The butler enters with a note. The mayor reads it. Mateo Alvarez has requested a meeting, he says aloud. Wants to deliver an invoice personally. His wife scowls. Ignore it. But Ava, sitting quietly with her tablet, speaks up. Can I go say hi? Everyone pauses. No, her mother snaps. Ava lowers her head, but not before whispering under her breath, in perfect Spanish. Él es amable. Y me enseñó una palabra nueva. He is kind. And he taught me a new word. Mateo sits in silence. His apartment is tidy. Too tidy, as if cleaning is the only thing that holds him together. On the table, a letter. Stamped from City Hall. Subject line. Termination of contract. Reason. Failure to maintain professional boundaries. Incident under review. Mateo folds the letter slowly. Then walks to the cabinet. Opens a drawer. Inside. A box. Inside the box. Medals. Photographs. A journal written in 5 languages. Takes out one item, a folded letter of recommendation. From the Department of Defense. Mr. Mateo Alvarez served as a linguistic consultant during operations in. He stops reading, closes the drawer. Then he picks up his phone, dials. Roy? He says, I'm ready. A street lamp flickers. Shadows stretched. The gardener no one saw. The veteran no one thanked. The boy no one trusted. They're about to rewrite the story this town keeps telling itself, one truth at a time. The bell above. The door jingles as Mateo steps inside. Not many choices on the shelves. A couple of bruised apples, 2 loaves of bread. The store always smells like expired coupons and tired dreams. He walks to the register. Mrs. DeWitt, an older white woman, with a crooked wig and sharp eyes, barely looks up. You still taking care of the mayor's place? She asks without warmth. Not anymore, she tuts. Figures. They always find a reason. He places a few items on the counter. Flour, canned beans, rice. Careful. Dog yours? She asks, eyeing the canine sitting patiently outside. No. One's, Mateo says. Well, it scares my customers. You should tie it up. Mateo doesn't answer. Just pays in cash. As he turns to leave, Jamal rushes in, breathless. Mr. Mateo. He glances up. They're saying stuff at school. That you got fired 'cause you were creeping around the mayor's house. Mateo sets his bag down slowly. They said you're undocumented. That you changed your name. Mrs. DeWitt leans in, clearly listening. Mateo kneels to Jamal's level. My name is Mateo Alvarez. It has always been, but they say you used to be in prison. Is it true? Mateo pauses. Looks at the boy not with anger, but with weight. I've lived many lives, some I chose. Some were chosen for me. None define me. Jamal frowns. But what do I tell them? Tell them, Mateo stands. You're still listening. That's more than most. He walks out. The door chimes again. The dog wags its tail and follows. Roy and Mateo sit side by side. A bus groans to a halt. Lets off one passenger. Pulls away again. No one gets on. You sure you want to go to that meeting tomorrow? Roy asks. Mateo nods. They think you're nothing, Roy mutters. That gives you power. Mateo smiles faintly. Power only matters when you know what to do with it. Roy glances over. You ever tell anyone you worked for the government? Mateo shakes his head. They didn't ask. They only saw dirt on my hands. Roy sighs. Then maybe it's time they see what you've been planting. Scene the next morning. Town hall community board meeting. Rows of chairs line a sterile room. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead. A giant portrait of Mayor Thompson hangs near the podium. Citizens gather. Most from Summerhill. Few from District 9. Mateo enters quietly, dressed in clean clothes, not a uniform, no rake, no gloves. Just a leather-bound folder under one arm. The retired canine waits outside. A staffer eyes him with suspicion. You here for public comment? Yes, 3-minute limit. He nods. Roy sits near the back. Jamal slips in quietly, sits beside him. Ava is there too, holding her mother's hand. The meeting begins. Talk of budgets, street repairs. A new summer camp for gifted youth. The next speaker, Mr. Mateo Alvarez. Whispers ripple through the room. He walks up slowly. Takes the mic. A pause. Then, my name is Mateo Alvarez. You know me as the man who trims your hedges, clears your leaves, and disappears when your guests arrive. Nervous laughter. I was called a trespasser, a threat. Fired without a hearing. That's fine. What's not fine is why. Eyes shift. Murmurs grow. I hold degrees in education and applied linguistics. I've taught in 5 countries. Served as a cultural advisor during 2 U.S. operations abroad. I speak 7 languages fluently. Gasps. I was not fired for misconduct. I was fired for breaking your illusion. For reminding you that the person who cleans your yard might understand more than your policy briefings. Someone coughs. He opens the folder. Pulls out a copy of his federal clearance. I bring this not for pity, but to make one point clear. Your assumptions are not my reality. Your fear is not my truth. He steps back. Silence. Then dash from the back. Roy begins clapping. Slow. Steady. Jamal joins. Then Ava, tentatively. A few more. Then order, the moderator shouts. This is a professional setting. The clapping dies. But the silence now feels different, heavy, awakened. Mateo steps outside. Canine rises to meet him, tail wagging. A reporter rushes up. Mr. Alvarez. Is it true you worked for the U.S. government? No comment. But you're just a gardener. He looks at her. Just? She hesitates. He walks away. As he does, the camera zooms in on the dog's collar. Still dusty. Still worn. But now there's something new tied to it. A small piece of paper. In Jamal's handwriting. Not everything broken stays down. Mateo kneels in his backyard. The soil is dry, but he digs anyway. One small seed at a time. The dog lies nearby, eyes half closed. In the distance, Roy sets up folding chairs in front of a wall he's painted white. Jamal sketches a mural. Ava plays. With sidewalk chalk writing words in Spanish, French, and English. And Mateo? Mateo doesn't smile. But for the first time in a long time, he looks up and says quietly, "Let's begin." The day begins in shadows. A tired orange glow spills. Over the rooftops of District 9, sirens fade into silence. An old radio crackles static before finding the voice of a preacher, humming scripture between bursts of static. Mateo is already awake. His hands are covered in soil, tending to his small garden behind the apartment complex. It's not much, just a strip of land with struggling green shoots, but he handles each plant like it's holy. From above, Roy watches from his window, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug. He doesn't speak, but something in his eyes says, "Today will be different." Across the street, Jamal leaves his apartment quietly. His backpack looks too heavy for a 10-year-old, slung over one shoulder. A neighbor yells something at her boyfriend. Through the window, glass shatters. The boy doesn't flinch. He walks toward Mateo's garden. Mateo doesn't turn. "Didn't miss the bus yet," he says softly. "I know," Jamal shrugs. "Just wanted to come early." Mateo finally glances up. "You okay?" Jamal shrugs again, but then his mouth tightens. "They took my sketchbook. Said I drew something unpatriotic. It was just people holding hands." Mateo sighs. Sometimes what scares them is unity. The boy looks confused. Mateo pulls a tomato from the vine and hands it to him. It's not sweet, but it's real. Jamal pockets it like a treasure. Roy shuffles through a cardboard box filled with old military documents, folded discharge papers, faded photos, medals. Some polished, some forgotten. He pulls out one photo. Himself, young and alert, surrounded by his unit. Half of them never made it home. He stares at the image. Then, a knock. Mateo steps in without a word. They sit. "You ever feel like they erased you?" Roy mutters. "Before you even got to speak?" Mateo nods. "I was 24 when I got back from Nam," Roy continues. "The parade was 3 blocks over. They sent us to the alley." He chuckles bitterly. "They said my service was appreciated, but not my presence." He picks up a document. A denial letter from the VIA, no valid ID on file. "I've got 4 government-issued tags," Roy says. "One with my blood type." He stares at Mateo. "Why are we always the ones who have to explain our humanity?" Mateo answers, quiet but firm. "Because they don't question the silence, only the sound." Jamal walks alone. His drawings have been confiscated. Again. One depicts a man standing on a podium, speaking 5 languages at once. Another shows courtroom with people shouting, and a gardener standing silent in the center. A teacher calls him aside. "You need to stop drawing those things, Jamal. They make the other students uncomfortable." He looks up. "Which part?" he asks. "The truth or the color?" The teacher stiffens. "That's not what I meant. I know." He walks away. In the stairwell, he opens his notebook and quietly writes in the margins, "I think Mateo was a teacher once, not a gardener. Maybe he still is. Just not in the way they understand." Roy stands in line behind 5 others. The waiting room hums with flickering lights and stale air. He reaches the front desk. "Name? Roy Henley. Insurance? No." She sighs. "We can't see you today without proof of insurance or active veteran status. I served 2 tours. Have shrapnel in my hip. Isn't that proof enough? Do you have a letter from the VA? They never mailed it. Then I can't help you." She slides the window shut. Roy stands there for a moment, then limps out. Outside, the sidewalk is too hot. The bench is too hard. The truth too loud in his chest. He sits anyway. The mayor flips through a stack of emails on his tablet. An aide enters. "Sir, there's a petition gaining traction. It demands a formal apology and review of Mr. Mateo Alvarez's termination. Let And guess, the mayor sighs. Organized by that vet, what's his name? Roy Henley and the boy Jamal Bryant. He's been sharing drawings. Went viral, local news picked it up. The mayor leans back, suddenly weary. I fired a gardener. He mutters, how did this become national news? The aide hesitates. Because he wasn't just a gardener. Mateo eats dinner alone. A quiet knock at the door. He opens it. Standing there is a man in uniform, police, but younger. Not like the ones who detained him. This one looks uncertain. Mr. Alvarez? Mateo nods. The officer clears his throat. I wanted to say thank you for last year at the adult center. Mateo frowns. You were the substitute ESL teacher. I was in your class. You taught me enough French to pass the exam and apply to the academy. Mateo stills. You became a cop? The man nods. I thought I'd make a difference. A beat of silence. Then the officer hands him a bottle of water. I saw how they treated you. It was wrong. I'm sorry. He turns to leave. Mateo watches him go. Then closes the door. And places the bottle carefully on the table, like a strange offering. Camera follows Jamal as he walks through an alley, spray can in hand. He's painting, not tagging, not vandalizing. Painting a mural. On a crumbling wall, he outlines the figures of Roy, Mateo, and the canine. Their eyes are turned upward. Behind them, not a flag. Not a slogan. Just light, and beneath it, the words, they buried us, but they forgot we were seeds. The sun had already set when the final blow came, not with a bang, but a letter slipped beneath Mateo's door. No stamp, no seal. Just a folded envelope with his name scrawled hastily. He sat for a long moment before opening it. His fingers, calloused but steady, unfolded the paper with a quiet precision. It read, effective immediately, your contract with Brighthaven Landscaping has been terminated. Your conduct has brought disrepute to our name and our clients. We regret this outcome, HR. Mateo placed the letter next to the untouched rice and beans on his table. The old canine lay at his feet, sensing something in the silence, resting its chin on his boot with a soft sigh. Meanwhile, across the district in a darkened garage, filled with half-sorted boxes and faded military jackets, Roy sat at a folding table, his old laptop open in front of him. The screen flickered, struggling to keep up with the years. But Roy's fingers moved with certainty. He was compiling names, men and women he'd served with, people who'd returned broken and invisible, forgotten by the very country they fought for. One by one, he called them, not to complain, not to cry, but to invite. They did it to Mateo, he'd say. They've done it to us. Maybe it's time we speak louder. At school, Jamal sat in the library during recess, flipping through an old dictionary. He wasn't looking for definitions. He was translating words Mateo had taught him: compassion, justice, testimony. Each word got its own drawing. He sketched a police badge, but inside it, a broken heart. A gardener's glove gripping a microphone. A courtroom turned into a garden. His teacher passed by, paused, then sighed. Jamal, she said softly, this ... isn't what the assignment asked for. It's what they need to read, he replied. She didn't press further. The town, once still beneath its surface calm, began to tremble in whispers. First came a blog post written by a teenage girl from Summerhill. Ava, the gardener who taught me Spanish, the title read. It described how she'd learned her first conjugation sitting under the magnolia tree as Mateo trimmed branches. How he taught her to say, mi nombre es Ava, when her father's colleagues came over. She posted a photo, a blurry one, yes but real. Mateo, kneeling in the grass, smiling faintly, while Ava held a notepad proudly. Within a day, the post had over 20,000 shares. People began asking, who was this man really? Then came the footage. Roy had been sifting through veterans forums when one contact, an old canine unit handler, sent something unexpected. "Your gardener's dog," the message read. "Check the collar." It turned out that the retired canine had once belonged to the city's narcotics division. And like many working dogs, it had been trained to record evidence through a tiny mounted camera during busts. The unit had retired the dog without wiping its memory. The camera still worked, and by sheer twist of fate or something deeper, it had been recording the day Mateo was accused of trespassing. Roy didn't wait. He contacted a local independent journalist, someone who didn't answer to the mayor. Together, they downloaded the footage. What it showed was damning. Mateo calmly raking leaves, the mayor's wife confronting him, the false accusation, the arrival of the police, and most importantly, the old dog standing protectively between Mateo and the officer's tail wagging, relaxed, showing no signs of threat. The footage ended with Mateo walking away, silent, but the dog remaining still, eyes watching the house. It was proof, not just of Mateo's innocence, but of the hostility that had been spun into danger. The story exploded. Within 48 hours, local news stations picked it up. "Retired police dog exposes false trespass charge." Comments flooded in, some angry, some ashamed, some defiant. But what no one expected was what came next. The mayor went on record, pressured by reporters. He held a brief conference on the steps of City Hall. He looked uncomfortable, sweaty. "We take all allegations seriously." He began reading stiffly from a sheet. "However, this situation is complex. Mr. Alvarez's behavior, while not criminal, raised concerns." When asked directly if he planned to apologize, he dodged the question. But what truly turned the tide was the moment Ava, standing beside her mother, stepped forward and said into a nearby mic, "He taught me to say hello in Spanish. He taught me that being kind doesn't need permission." The clip went viral. That same night, Mateo received a visit, not from the police, not from the mayor, but from a woman named Clarissa Yu, head of the city's education board. She brought tea. She sat on his couch, and she apologized. "We failed you," she said. "We also failed our children." Then she slid over a sealed envelope. "There's a vacancy on the Community Education Advisory Council. We need someone who understands what it's like to be ignored, to be heard despite the noise." Mateo stared at the envelope for a long time before nodding once. "I'll think about it," he said. That same evening, Roy stood in the middle of the old community center, surrounded by chairs, some filled, some empty, but all facing the front. The projector screen showed a single slide. Voices left behind, veterans without home. Roy didn't need to shout. He simply told stories, names, places, battles won abroad, but lost here. When he mentioned Mateo, someone clapped. Then, someone else. And soon, the entire room rose in a standing ovation, not for glory, but for truth. As the week passed, more cracks began to appear. City contracts that relied on underpaid immigrant labor were quietly audited. School suspension data revealed a pattern. Black and brown boys were suspended 3 times more than their peers for the same infractions. Letters poured into the local paper, some angry, some redemptive. But the one that stood out most came from a 12-year-old girl in Summerhill. "I used to think our side of the town was better, but now I think our side just hides things better." Back in District 9, Mateo sat with Jamal, helping him translate a poem into 3 languages. The boy beamed. "When I grow up," he said, "I want to be a teacher." Mateo smiled. "You already are. You're just waiting for the world to catch up." The old canine barked softly, as if in agreement. As night fell, a soft wind blew through the cracked windows of the apartment. And for the first time in weeks, Mateo allowed himself to close his eyes, not out of weariness, but peace. The weight hadn't lifted, but it had shifted. It now belonged to all of them, not just the gardener, not just the Soldier. Not just the boy, but to a city learning one truth at a time. How to hear what had always been there beneath the silence. There were cameras outside the courthouse before the sun even rose. Not the big national ones, at least not yet, just locals. The kind that had covered every high school football game and ribbon cutting for the last 20 years. But they were here now, their lenses fixed on the courthouse doors, waiting for a gardener to arrive. Inside, the gallery was packed. Summerhill's finest city officials in tailored suits, neighborhood association chairs with perfect pearls, and parents who rarely attended public anything occupied the left side of the room. On the right sat the others: teachers, veterans, union workers, and quiet citizens from District 9, who didn't usually wear ties but wore pain like a second skin. At the center of it all sat Mateo Alvarez, flanked by two public interest attorneys. He wore no suit, no tie. Just a clean button-down, sleeves rolled up, collar slightly open. As if to say, "I'm not here to play your game. I'm here to end it." The judge entered. An older white woman with hair like stone and eyes sharper than her gavel. "This is the case of Alvarez v. City of Somerville," she said, her voice even. "Charges include unlawful termination, defamation, emotional distress, and racially motivated retaliation." A murmur ran through the room. The city's attorney stood first, tall, slick, and forgettable. The kind of man who'd mastered the art of smiling while cutting funding for public housing. "Your Honor," he began, "the city deeply regrets the misunderstanding that led to Mr. Alvarez's dismissal. But we must clarify, this is not a case of discrimination. It's a matter of protocol, of professionalism. The mayor's office received a credible concern from a resident and acted accordingly. No harm was intended." Mateo didn't flinch, but his attorney leaned forward. "May I?" The judge nodded. "We intend to prove that harm was not only intended, but sustained, repeatedly, publicly, and with full awareness of who Mr. Alvarez is and what he represents." The judge raised an eyebrow. "What exactly does he represent?" The attorney smiled. "Truth, memory, and accountability." Then came the first piece of evidence, the dog video. The footage played on a large screen behind the witness stand. It was grainy but clear. Mateo working silently. The mayor's wife approaching, voice sharp, accusing. Police arriving. No aggression, no threat. Just an old man setting down a rake and being treated like a suspect. And beside him, a retired police dog, calm, loyal, unbothered. The courtroom was silent. Then came the photos. Mateo teaching ESL at the adult center, leading cultural seminars at the library, interpreting at a veterans workshop. Every image chipped away at the lie the city had tried to paint. The city's attorney attempted to recover. He brought in the mayor as a character witness. The mayor took the stand, stiff as marble. "Did you personally authorize Mr. Alvarez's termination?" the lawyer asked. "I did." "And why?" "Because the perception of a threat, regardless of intent, requires swift action. We have to keep our residents safe." The defense attorney stood. "Do you speak Spanish, Mr. Mayor?" He blinked. "No." "French?" "No." "German?" "No." "Mr. Alvarez does." And yet, he was labeled a threat. "You didn't even know he was multilingual, did you?" The mayor shifted. "That wasn't relevant to his job." "But it was relevant enough to make your daughter bilingual," the attorney shot back. Gasps from the gallery. Ava lowered her head. The attorney continued. "Did you know your daughter wrote a blog post in defense of Mr. Alvarez? I don't monitor everything she does online. Did you know she credited him with helping her pass her language placement exam?" The mayor paused. "I did not." The silence deepened. Then came Roy. He took the stand slowly, his limp more pronounced today, but his back straight. "Name?" the clerk asked. "Roy Henley, veteran, 2 tours, Bronze Star." "Occupation?" Forgotten, he said, staring straight at the mayor. The courtroom laughed quietly, respectfully. The judge didn't stop it. Roy told the story of the community center. Of the letters Mateo helped translate for widows who couldn't read the last words of their sons. Of the night he was nearly arrested and Mateo stood between him and the badge. He doesn't raise his voice, Roy said. But he speaks volumes. Then came Jamal. Too young for the stand, they said. But his drawings were submitted as evidence. One showed Mateo planting seeds in a courtroom, while city officials tried to pave over them. Another depicted the police dog sitting protectively in front of Mateo, with the caption, "Some animals know what justice smells like." Finally, the judge addressed Mateo directly. "You've been silent this whole time, Mr. Alvarez. Do you wish to speak?" He stood slowly. No paper in hand. No folder, just words. "My name is Mateo Alvarez, born in Chihuahua, Mexico. Naturalized U.S. citizen, educator, veteran contractor for the Department of Defense. I taught soldiers how to say, 'Put down your weapon' in Pashto, so they didn't have to fire first. I translated ceasefire orders during live combat. I helped draft peacekeeping protocols. I've spent my life making sure that people who look like me are heard, because for too long we weren't." He looked around the room. "I was labeled a threat for being present, for existing, for working too close to power without being part of it." He turned to the mayor. "You didn't fire a gardener. You fired a mirror, and you didn't like what it showed you." The mayor looked down. Mateo turned back to the judge. "I do not ask for sympathy, or even justice. I ask for clarity, for the record to reflect who I am and who I am not." The judge leaned forward. "I've heard enough." And then, the courtroom exhaled. The ruling didn't come immediately. The judge recessed for deliberation, and the courtroom emptied into a swarm of whispers and camera flashes. Outside, the sidewalk had become a battleground of opinion. Some people cheered when Mateo stepped into the light. Others booed from behind sunglasses, clutching coffee cups with Summerhill HOA logos. One man shouted, "If he was so smart, why was he cutting grass?" Another woman replied sharply, "Because we only offer ladders to people we like at the bottom." The air buzzed, tense, divided, uncomfortable truths cracking like old paint on a wall. Everyone thought was solid, but not everyone left the courthouse. Jamal stood by the front steps with a sign he'd made himself. In crayon, it read, "They called him a threat. I called him my teacher." Roy sat on the curb nearby, rubbing his knee. "You think we won?" Jamal asked. Roy looked up. "Kid, sometimes it's not about winning. It's about being seen losing the right way. That's when the tide shifts." Jamal didn't quite get it, but he nodded like he did. Inside the mayor's office, chaos had started to bubble. Staffers debated whether the mayor should resign. An aide stormed out, shaking his head. "We buried a man's dignity," he muttered. "And now we're drowning in the truth." The mayor sat quietly in his office, staring at the framed photo of him and Ava at her first piano recital. On the wall behind him hung a plaque that read, "Integrity is doing the right thing, even when no one's watching." He got up, took it down, and placed it face down in a drawer. The next morning, the verdict was read in a packed courtroom. The judge's voice was firm, resolute. "This court finds that the termination of Mr. Alvarez was motivated not by policy, but by perception. A perception rooted in cultural bias, reinforced by systemic negligence, and upheld by silence. Therefore, we rule in favor of the plaintiff. Mr. Alvarez will be awarded damages for unlawful termination and public defamation." The gallery erupted. Some clapped, some groaned. The mayor lowered his eyes. Mateo stood motionless. No smile, no fist in the air. Just stillness. But the fire had been lit. Outside, news vans arrived. National ones this time. Interviews began. Hashtags trended. Teachers across the state began posting about their own Mateo moments. Immigrant workers shared stories of being punished for being educated. A high school valedictorian reposted Jamal's drawing. "This is why I applied to be a teacher." She wrote, "Back in District 9, the celebration was quiet but powerful. Neighbors brought food. Someone set up speakers playing music from every continent." Mateo sat under a tree with the dog beside him, watching as Roy led a group of veterans in setting up a pop-up health check station. A city volunteer came by with forms. "We're starting a fund to support medical services for veterans. Can you help us organize?" Roy blinked, then nodded. "Hell yes." Ava, escorted by her mother, slipped away and handed Mateo a notebook. Inside were her Spanish lessons, carefully labeled. "I still remember," she whispered. "You made it fun." Mateo opened to the first page. It said, "Mi nombre es Ava. Me gusta aprender cantago." He closed the notebook gently and nodded. "Y siempre serás bienvenida en mi jardín." A few days later, the city council announced a community meeting to restore trust. It was the first one held at a neutral venue, the District 9 Public Library. That night, both Summerhill and District 9 residents sat side by side, uncomfortable, hesitant, but present. And when Mateo was introduced as the newest member of the Education Equity Board, the applause didn't come from one side, it rose from both. Slowly, awkwardly, but undeniably. Yet perhaps, the most powerful moment came the following week. A young, white boy no older than Jamal walked to the podium during the school's student council meeting, nervous, red in the face. He held a folded letter. His voice trembled. "I told people Mr. Alvarez was dangerous. I said it because my dad did. But he wasn't. I watched the video. I saw what really happened. And I'm sorry." Jamal watched from the back. He didn't clap. He didn't nod. He just stood still. And for the first time, the boy looked back at him and didn't look away. Back at home, Mateo knelt once again in the soil behind his building. This time, he wasn't alone. Jamal dug beside him. Roy set up a bench nearby. Ava painted garden. Signs in 3 languages. And the dog, well, he lay proudly under the sun. A new collar on his neck with a single word engraved on it. Witness. The garden bloomed again. Not just with vegetables and herbs, but with stories. Stories that no longer whispered in shame, but grew tall, proud, and undeniable. Mateo never raised his voice. He never broke a law, never threw a punch, but he stood. And standing, in a world that prefers you bowed, is its own kind of revolution. It wasn't the ruling that shook the city. It was the silence that followed. The kind of silence where everything feels suspended, waiting to fall in one direction or the other. For some, it was a pause of disbelief. How could a gardener speak like that, win like that, be that? For others, it was a moment of clarity, the kind that pulls the veil back and reveals just how deep the cracks already were. The first tremor hit the mayor's office. The press turned relentless. Every answer he gave birthed 3 more questions. Why hadn't his staff known about Mateo's credentials? Why did he downplay the dog footage? Why was a linguistics consultant from a defense program trimming hedges in a gated community? His approval rating plummeted. But more than that, he lost the confidence of his own house. Ava no longer looked him in the eye. At dinner, she spoke Spanish on purpose, loudly, fluently. Her mother asked her to stop. She didn't. City Hall scrambled. A memo leaked from the mayor's office revealed that he had previously approved a contract with a private security firm abroad, using the very Spanish phrases Mateo had been terminated for suspiciously muttering on. Sight. The irony went viral. A side-by-side clip was created. On one half, the mayor's wife calling the language hostile. On the other, the mayor himself using the exact words in a press conference about overseas investments. The internet did what it does best: memes, satire, outrage. But the undercurrent was dead serious. Who else have we ignored because we couldn't see past our assumptions? Meanwhile, in Summerhill, cracks formed not on walls, but around dinner tables. A father shouted at his teenage son for questioning the news. "You're defending that man?" The boy shouted back, "You mean the guy who taught Ava how to speak 3 tenses before your country club friends learned to pronounce her name?" In one household, a fence was put up around the garden. In another, a garden was started. District 9, on the other hand, didn't erupt. It evolved, quietly, powerfully. Roy had started a file. Not just for himself, but for every veteran denied care in the last 5 years. He called it the Wall Within. It listed names, dates, letters returned, claims denied. He set up a table at the public library, next to the mural of Mateo and the dog. People came, they brought stories. One man with a limp worse than Roy's cried as he handed over a box of unopened via mail. "I didn't think anyone would listen," he whispered. At the same time, Jamal was invited to speak at his school's diversity assembly. He was nervous at first, shaking as he held the microphone. But then he looked out and saw Mateo at the back of the room, standing still, like always. Jamal cleared his throat. "People say silence is peaceful, but not always. Sometimes silence is heavy. It sits on your chest and makes you forget how to speak." But Mr. Alvarez, he didn't shout. He showed me how to make silence into something strong. A hush followed, then applause. Not polite, not obligatory, real. Elsewhere, the city was reacting in strange, unexpected ways. The Chamber of Commerce issued a statement calling for better cultural sensitivity training. Local businesses started offering free language classes to staff. Some just did it to save face. Others meant it. A few openly resisted. One bakery hung a sign that read, "English only like it's always been." Within a week, they closed due to lack of foot traffic. And yet, despite the noise, Mateo remained still. He declined every national interview, every book deal, every viral hero segment from cable networks. When asked why, he said, "The story was never about me. It was about what you did when you saw me." But what shook people most wasn't his humility. It was what came next. A week after the verdict, the mayor received an anonymous tip that a senior procurement officer had been using undocumented workers for under-the-table maintenance on city parks. When the story broke, photos circulated of the workers, brown-skinned, calloused hands, faces blurred, but one thing was clear: they looked just like Mateo. In fact, one of them was a distant cousin. The hypocrisy boiled over. The city council was forced to act. They opened an ethics investigation. They suspended the officer. They called for a community review board. And for the first time, they offered Roy and Mateo seats at that board. Roy grunted. "About damn time." Mateo paused. "I'll accept. But only if Jamal can attend the meetings too." The council laughed. Until they saw Mateo wasn't smiling. He wasn't joking. The city reluctantly agreed that it was a small seat at a big table, but it was a start. And yet, even in progress, the backlash came. A local radio host began calling Mateo the quiet tyrant. Said he was bullying the city into guilt. Said he weaponized identity. Others followed op-eds, blog rants, anonymous threats. One note left on Mateo's apartment door simply read, "Grass should know its place." He burned that. One, but he didn't respond. Instead, he built a bench in front of the garden. Painted it himself. The same colors Jamal used in his drawings. Underneath, he carved 3 words, "Presence is resistance." And on that bench, every afternoon, someone new sat. Not to talk, not to argue. Just to sit. To watch something grow again. The real shockwave didn't come from above, but from below. It came when kids in Jamal's school started raising their hands, not just to answer questions, but to ask better ones. Why did we never learn about people like Mr. Alvarez in history class? Why is Spanish called a foreign language if half the school speaks it at home? One teacher cried in her car that afternoon, not from guilt, but from something harder, realization. Ava began attending Saturday meets at the District 9 library, sitting beside Jamal and a few other kids from both sides of the city. They started a project together, The People We Missed. Each student chose someone in their community whose story had never been told. One boy picked the janitor at City Hall. A girl chose her grandma, who'd been a cook for 40 years but never had a single photo on the wall. Ava chose her old Manny, whose name she'd forgotten until Mateo helped her remember how to say it in Spanish. That moment, that restoration of a name, felt heavier than all her father's speeches. The group asked Mateo to be their guest speaker. He refused, politely, but on the day of their final presentation, he showed up early, quietly set out chairs, and made sure every microphone worked. He didn't speak, he listened. That night, a local journalist wrote, "Maybe the revolution isn't always televised. Maybe it's planted, watered, and quietly grown by hands calloused not from protest, but persistence." Still, backlash persisted. A group calling themselves Voices for Order began protesting outside City Hall with signs reading, "Silence the activist gardeners," and "Dignity does not equal disruption." Their speeches echoed the same talking points. He disrespected authority. He divided the city. He made our kids ashamed of who we are. But their voices, once loud, were starting to feel like echoes bouncing off walls no one listened to anymore. And when Roy published The Wall Within as an open archive detailing 63 veteran cases, mishandled or ignored by the city, those voices began to fall silent. People couldn't argue with numbers. They couldn't argue with names and faces. They couldn't argue with wounds. At the next council meeting, Roy stood at the podium again, not with a folder, but with a framed photo. "My brother, Harold, died in '94. Never got a burial. With honors. You know why? Because no one returned my calls. You know who did? Him." Roy pointed to Mateo, "A man you called a liability, a risk, a problem. He translated the letter for my mother. Gave us the only goodbye we ever got. So tell me, who's the real public servant?" The room stood. Not because they were told to, but because they had to. Even the judge from the trial was there, seated in the back, hands folded. She didn't smile. She just nodded once. Deeply. Change didn't come like a wave. It came like rain. Small drops. Persistent. In District 9. More community gardens began popping up. In Summerhill. More fences came down. A bakery that once hung English-only signs now had Bienvenidos stenciled on the windows. The mayor, still in office but now largely sidelined, declined to run for re-election. In his resignation letter he wrote, "Power is not control. It is stewardship. I failed at both." In his place, the city elected a former high school principal, someone known more for listening than leading. And one of his first acts? Appointing Mateo as director of a new community-based adult education program. When the offer came, Mateo paused. Then asked, "Will it have a garden?" They said yes. He accepted. On opening day, Roy rolled in with a cart of donated books. Ava arrived early to hang signs. Jamal brought a wooden plaque he made in shop class. It read, "Justice grows here." And the dog Old Faithful, bicolored eyes now graying, lay beneath the desk, collar still engraved with witness. That afternoon, someone handed Mateo a newspaper clipping. A quote was highlighted in yellow. "In a kofi en yellow world that tells you to stay quiet, every word you plant is an act of rebellion." Mateo folded it gently, slid it into his pocket, and walked outside to check the soil. The dog was limping again. Not badly, but enough for Mateo to notice. He knelt beside it, pressing gently near the joint, whispering something in German. The dog looked up, not with pain, but patience. "You've carried too much for too long," Mateo said, almost to himself. He paused, then added, "So have I." Just behind him, Jamal crouched with a trowel in his hand, digging up weeds around the garden bed. "I think he's tired," Jamal said, pointing at the dog. "I think we all are," Mateo replied, straightening his back with a soft grunt. "But tired doesn't mean done." Since the opening of the Adult Education Center, the garden had become more than a place for vegetables. It was now the soft heart of the building. People stopped there before going into class, sat on the bench to catch their breath after a long shift, or left messages pinned to the wooden posts. "Thank you for listening. I passed my GED. I got a job interview." One note was simply a drawing a gardener watering people instead of plants. Everyone knew who it was meant to be. Mateo never asked for recognition, but people gave it anyway in quiet ways. A lunch packed by a single mom he once helped fill out a scholarship form. A new pair of gloves from an old student who now ran a hardware store. And sometimes, just presents. Like Roy's, the old vet came by 3 times a week, always early, always grumbling, but never missing. "I fought wars with fewer bullet points than your curriculum," he muttered one day, flipping through the lesson plan. Mateo smirked. "Then you'll survive orientation." Roy rolled his eyes but didn't deny the truth. What surprised people most was how the bonds were forming, not between expected allies, but between opposites. One morning, a young officer showed up outside the gate. Clean uniform, nervous posture. He had been in the courtroom during Mateo's trial, quiet, watching from the back row. Now he stood holding a small cardboard box. "These are my grandfather's," he said. "He served in Korea. He never talked about it, but he wrote everything down." He handed the box to Roy. "I heard you were collecting stories. I think his belong with yours." Roy opened the lid, revealing letters, medals, and one photo of a man sitting on sandbags, flute in hand. He played jazz in the trenches. The officer said. Roy didn't speak for a long time. Then finally, "So did I." Meanwhile, Jamal's drawings had started to appear across town, first on the community board, then in the windows of small shops. One depicting Mateo, the dog, and Roy beneath a blooming tree was printed on the front of the city's quarterly arts newsletter. The editor didn't ask for permission. But when he handed Jamal a copy, he said, "I've been doing this for 20 years, never had a cover get more letters." Jamal beamed. But it wasn't just the kids building bridges. One afternoon, Mateo found a handwritten note taped to the side of the garden shed. It was from a woman in Summerhill. The same woman who once called the police on him. "I don't expect forgiveness," it read. "But I want you to know I remember what I said. I also remember the look in your eyes when I did. I'm trying to change that look in my children's eyes now." Beneath the letter, a folded envelope held a voucher for free mulch and soil delivery. "It's not much," she wrote. "But it's honest." Mateo didn't write back. But he accepted the mulch. And when the truck arrived, he let Jamal wave them in. A few days later, Ava showed up with a request. "I want to do a podcast," she said. "For school. Can I interview you?" Mateo hesitated. "I don't speak well into microphones," she grinned. "That's okay. I ask better than I speak." The interview was simple. 2 voices, 1 table. Ava asked, "What makes you proud?" Mateo paused. Silence that doesn't feel like fear anymore. "What do you miss?" she followed. He blinked. "The sound of my mother saying my full name. I haven't heard that in years." When the episode aired, it trended citywide. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. The connection between Ava and Jamal deepened. They began writing together, short scripts, poems, dialogues between fictional characters that felt a lot like the people around them. They turned one of their pieces into a play called The Gardener's Court. It had 3 characters, the man, the boy, and the dog. The play ended with a simple line from the boy. "He didn't pull weeds. He pulled truth out of soil. The school agreed to produce it at the annual arts festival. On opening night, the gym was packed. Roy sat front row. Mateo stood in the back. When Jamal walked onto the stage and delivered his first line, he locked eyes with Mateo, then said it. Sometimes when they try to bury you, they forget you're a seed. The audience was silent. Then came applause. Not thunderous. But warm, reluctant, healing. A local councilwoman stood at the end. Not for show, but because something in her chest cracked and let in light. That night when Mateo walked home, he found a package by his door. Inside, a book of translated poetry from his favorite author. And a note, for the man who taught us all a new language. Hope. One Friday afternoon, the garden was unusually quiet. No classes, no student visits, no deliveries. Just wind moving through the tomato vines. Mateo was trimming back a stubborn basil plant when he heard a sound familiar but jarring. The sharp click of a phone camera. He turned. A man stood outside the fence, dressed in business casual, face unfamiliar but confident. "Don't mind me," the man said. "I work for a national outlet. Just scouting locations for a story on local activism." Mateo straightened. "You could ask first," the man shrugged. "Candid always plays better." That evening, the image was online, cropped, filtered, captioned, "From immigrant to influencer. How one man used a lawnmower to win the city." Mateo stared at the screen, then closed the laptop. He didn't say anything, but Roy did. "They're gonna twist it. They always do." "Let them," Mateo said, but his tone betrayed him. There was weariness now, where before there had been quiet strength. The next morning, he skipped the garden. Instead, he walked past the school, past the courthouse, all the way to the edge of Summerhill. He stood outside the gate, not to enter, just to look. The same security guard from last year was still there, older now, less smug. Their eyes met. The guard nodded once. Mateo nodded back, then turned around. He didn't want revenge. He wanted distance. But distance, it turned out, was not something he'd earned. Later that week, Jamal showed up alone. His usual smile was gone. He held a crumpled letter from school. "They suspended me," he said flatly. "Said I was too challenging during history." Mateo sat down beside him on the bench. "What did you say?" Jamal looked away. "I asked why my people were only in the textbook twice, once in chains, once in protest. I said there had to be more than that." Mateo didn't respond. Just put a hand on Jamal's shoulder. "There is," he said. "But you'll have to be the one to write it." 2 days later, a new voice entered the circle. Her name was Naomi, a single mother in her 30s, recently enrolled in the adult English program. She was quiet, observant, always sitting near the back of class. One afternoon, after a lesson on metaphors, she approached Mateo. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. "Always. I used to clean houses in Summerhill. I'd hear them talk about us, like we were just wind blowing through. You reminded me we're trees." She began helping in the garden after class. Didn't ask. Just started showing up with gloves. And soon, she and Roy began talking not about pain, but plants. He'd grown squash during his rehab years. She preferred cucumbers. They argued, laughed, swapped tips. When Jamal saw them laughing together one day, he whispered to Mateo, "We're becoming a sitcom." That was the thing no one had expected. Joy, amid all the work, all the healing, all the policy shifts. There was laughter now. Ava showed up with mangoes from her grandmother. Jamal built a new trellis with the help of 2 veterans. Naomi convinced the center to host a cultural food night. Roy cooked beans the real way, and everyone left with something more than just full bellies. Mateo, for his part, simply watched it unfold, until one night, the dog barked, a low, unfamiliar sound that protective. He opened the door. On the porch was a small package. No return address. Inside, a flash drive, and a note written in thick block letters. Before you became a gardener, you were something else. Maybe it's time they remember. Mateo stared at it for a long time before plugging it in. The file opened to a video, grainy, but his face was there, not as he looked, now but younger, cleaner, wearing a headset. Speaking in 3 languages as military personnel stood behind him. It was an old briefing. Confidential. Somehow leaked. His voice echoed from the speakers. We neutralize conflict when we understand the language of fear. And when we name it not in anger but in truth. The screen froze on his younger face. Roy came into the room. Saw the video. Whistled low. Damn, he muttered. You really were the voice in the room. Mateo didn't smile, didn't gloat. He just whispered, and they still only saw the rake. Roy sat beside him. Not anymore. Outside, the wind moved through the garden. Gentler now. As if it too was learning to listen. The storm didn't begin with thunder. It began with a name. A name printed at the bottom of a memo that wasn't supposed to exist. Alvarez. The document was unearthed during a routine audit of declassified federal contracts, buried beneath layers of bureaucratic nothing. But it stood out because it bore the seal of the Department of Defense, dated nearly 15 years prior, and the title, Strategic Linguistic Intelligence Advisor, Tier 2 clearance. The local journalist who found it, an intern, actually chasing leads for a grad thesis, didn't know what it meant. But he recognized the name. He remembered the trial, the dog, the gardener. So he called Roy. Roy didn't answer. But an hour later, Mateo did. I'm listening, he said. The next day, it broke. Headline: City's former gardener was federal intelligence asset in 2 war zones. The news spread like dry fire over brittle fields. The story unfolded piece by piece. Archived footage, interdepartmental letters, awards never delivered, speeches never aired, transcripts redacted for national interest. And beneath it all, a pattern. Mateo had been present at some of the most delicate diplomatic missions of the post-9/11 era. He'd advised field units in Afghanistan, translated surrender conditions in Syria, and once on record diffused an international hostage situation using only voice. And yet, here, in his own country, in his own city, he'd been reduced to a landscaper accused of trespass. The city was stunned. Even those who'd supported him didn't know the full weight of the man they stood beside. The mayor's office issued a statement immediately. We were unaware of Mr. Alvarez's prior federal work. Had this been known, the rest was lost in noise. No one cared what followed, because the damage was already done. Not to Mateo, but to every assumption people had wrapped around his silence. At the community center, the mood shifted. Naomi whispered, he was more than what we thought. Roy snapped, he always was. You just finally caught up. Jamal was speechless. So he was like, a spy? No, Mateo finally said, after long pause. I was a translator. I helped people who didn't speak the same language stop shooting long enough to start listening. But you didn't tell anyone. Mateo looked at the boy, then at the dog sleeping near the garden gate. Would it have changed how they treated me? Jamal didn't answer. He didn't need to, because they both knew the truth. The leak didn't stop there. Soon, another document surfaced. An internal memo between the mayor and a contractor authorizing the quiet employment of undocumented workers to trim public spaces for less than minimum wage. The signature at the bottom was familiar. The date on the memo? 2 weeks before Mateo was fired. The implication was ugly and clear. They had removed a man with knowledge, dignity, and legal status while exploiting those without it. The mayor tried to deny. But screenshots, emails, encrypted texts, all spilled out. Roy, now acting as a public liaison, called it what it was. Policy by prejudice. Strategy by silence. Public outcry swelled. Not just from District 9, but from Summerhill too. Parents demanded new elections. Teachers walked out in protest at one veteran chained himself to the flagpole outside City Hall with a sign that read, "They served abroad, we failed them at home." Through it all, Mateo remained silent, but not absent. He attended the rallies. He sat on the panels. He watched as people fought each other to apologize, to understand, to erase what they once believed. He never asked for any of it. He just watered the garden. The week after the revelation, the city could no longer pretend it was fine. The school board held an emergency session, not to discuss curriculum, but to address demands for accountability. Students walked out with signs that read, "If Mateo had been white, would he still be cutting hedges?" Outside, a girl recited Jamal's now famous line, "They called him a threat. I called him my teacher." Inside the council chambers, things were unraveling. Roy stepped up to the mic, not with a folder this time, but with a box. "This," he said, "is what they buried." He pulled out document after document, via letters marked unprocessed, military commendations returned undeliverable. And worst of all, death certificates, soldiers, advisors, translators, people who had served, and then disappeared into silence. Mateo wasn't the only one, Roy growled. "He's just the one you got caught forgetting." Then came the file. It had no city seal, no stamp. Just one word, exile. Inside were records of contractors, foreign-born, bilingual, often brown, used in defense work and later denied legal status due to clearance revocation, despite years of service. Mateo's name wasn't alone. There were 23 others. 5 were confirmed deceased. 2 were homeless. 4 had been deported. Mateo's file was among them, only his had a yellow tag, active, flagged for quiet, termination. The room froze. No one spoke. No one blinked. Because the implication was undeniable. Mateo hadn't just been fired. He'd been buried professionally, legally, and almost historically. Erased. And they had done it on purpose. When the press asked for comment, the federal agency passed the blame to a former subcontractor. The subcontractor no longer existed. The paper trail vanished into legal fog. But the truth didn't single quote substitute. It lived now in Roy's archive, in Jamal's mural, in the podcast Ava had started, now downloaded over 2 million times. And in the quiet garden, where Mateo still showed up each morning, gloves on, sleeves rolled, and the dog limping beside him. That week, a little girl named Marisol came to the community center with her father, a man who spoke no English and trembled when asked to sign the visitor log. Mateo walked out, smiled, and greeted him in Spanish. The man's shoulders eased. "He said he was told not to come," Marisol explained, "that this place wasn't for him." Mateo handed him a clipboard. "Now it is," he said softly, but not all responses were kind. A letter arrived one night, slipped under the door. Inside, a single sentence, "You should have stayed buried." Mateo didn't flinch. He put the letter in a drawer with the others. Then he sat down and wrote something on a yellow notepad. It wasn't for court or press. It was for Jamal. One day, they will try to write history again. When they do, remind them we never asked to be heroes. We just wanted to be seen as whole. That same week, Mateo received an invitation handwritten, sealed with gold foil from the National Civil Rights Museum. They wanted to honor him with a Community Courage Award. He declined. But he sent Roy in his place. Roy didn't wear a suit. He wore his old uniform, medals crooked, collar frayed. He stood at the podium and said, "You keep honoring the people who scream. Today, I want you to honor the man who whispered until we all remembered how to listen." They gave him a standing ovation. Back home, the garden was thriving. Naomi had started her own ESL class. Jamal had finished his first graphic novel, The Man Who Planted Truth. Ava was set to speak at the state capitol, and the dog, now officially adopted by the community, was featured on the cover of the city paper under the headline, "The Witness That Changed Everything." As for Mateo, he was asked again and again, "What do you want now?" He always gave the same answer, "I want nothing." And then, after a pause, "Except maybe a little more rain." It began not with fire, but with invitation. The city announced a special tribunal to address systemic failures in the treatment of civic employees with national service records. A performance, Roy called it. "They're trying to put a bow on a wound," he muttered, adjusting his tie. But Mateo accepted the invitation. The hall was packed. Council members in press suits, news cameras lining the aisles. The mayor, resigned, but still seated in a ceremonial role, looked smaller now, less man, more shadow. When Mateo entered, the room stilled. No guards, no lawyers. Just him, the dog, and a folder worn thin at the edges. He walked slowly to the center, placed the folder on the podium, and looked out. "This city built walls," he said calmly, "not to protect itself, but to forget who held it up." He turned toward the mayor. "You asked me to trim your hedges." "I did. You asked me to disappear after. I didn't." He paused, then switched to French. The room hesitated. Then Spanish. Then back to English. "I speak in 3 tongues because I was born to bridge, not divide. But the city only ever wanted me to speak in 1 submission." Gasps. Roy, in the audience, clapped once slow, deliberate. Others joined. The mayor stood. "I didn't know your history," he said. "I admit that. But I ask, what do you want from us now?" Mateo looked at him. Not with anger, but with sorrow. "I want you to listen. Not to me, but to the people whose voices you've ignored longer than you've held office." He turned to Jamal, who was now standing in the aisle. Beside him, a boy from Summerhill held a note. He began to read. "I said things I didn't understand. I repeated words I heard at home. But now I know better, because I met him. Because he let me see what quiet power looks like." The entire room was silent. Then Ava stepped forward. She held a ribbon, not red, not blue, but green. She walked up to Mateo and tied it around the podium. "Hope grows here," she whispered, and the room broke into quiet applause. Not for show. But for truth. The city didn't change in a day, but something shifted. The tribunal issued its recommendations: reparations for wrongly dismissed public servants, formal inclusion of immigrant contributions in local curricula, and the establishment of a permanent community advisory board, with Mateo as its honorary co-chair. Mateo declined the salary, but accepted the chair. Roy launched a program for veterans with PTSD. He called it the second uniform. No ranks, no medals. Just a table, a coffee pot, and stories that were no longer whispered in shame. Jamal received a scholarship to an arts academy out of state. On his last day in the garden, he hugged Mateo long and quiet. "You taught me to fight with my mind," he said. Mateo smiled. "You taught me I still had one." Ava became a liaison between Summerhill and District 9 schools. Her first act? Removing the gifted label from a single program, and instead proposing community-based learning groups with mixed backgrounds. "We were never lacking intelligence," she said. "We were lacking attention." Naomi was hired full-time to run the garden program. She renamed it The Listening Place, and as for Mateo, he kept coming. Every morning. Same boots, same gloves. But now people came with him. They planted peppers. Beside veteran stories, they built benches from the wood of old fences. And near the garden gate, a bronze plaque was installed. It read, "This soil remembers every hand that shaped it, especially the ones no one thanked." The dog lay beneath it, old and peaceful, watching children laugh among the lavender. And Mateo, now called Professor again, by those who once ignored him, sat in the shade of a tree he never planted, knowing someone else one day would sit beneath it too, and maybe, finally, they would see. He never asked for applause. He never chased a title. He simply showed up day after day until the world finally caught up with his truth. In a city that once silenced him, he taught them to listen. And in a garden they tried to erase, he planted something no storm could uproot. If this story touched you, share it. And if you believe in honoring those whose voices were nearly lost, subscribe. Because the world needs more stories like Mateo's, and we're just getting started.